I imagine you're kind of like a human intelligence data bank of classified information of your country's most protected secrets, and which would go to things like who your country's killed, where they've killed them, who they're planning to kill. Would that be right?
The first half is certainly true. Any operations officer will have a surprising number of secrets that would cause political scandal and problems if they were to leak. That's true. On the killing part, the agency didn't kill people. It was illegal to do from before I entered into service in the early mid-'80s. It was President Ford who banned any attempt to assassinate. So that was 1977 until President Clinton, and it was 1998, I believe, when he changed the law specifically so that we were unfettered and able to act in some meaningful way against Osama bin Laden. So for that 22-year period, the agency didn't ever do that sort of thing. After that, what you say would be about assassination or killing people is theoretically possible, but operations are always very compartmented. So if I'm involved in an operation, I will know about it. But even if I sit this close to you in my office, if you are working on a different operation that I am not involved in, I will not know. So I don't have a pervasive knowledge at all. No one does, except for maybe the director. I'm aware of some operations during the, quote, war on terror, the fight against Al-Qaeda, that involved efforts to kill people.
So have you been responsible for people's deaths?
No, not directly. I was involved in intelligence collection as part of this one tile in this mosaic, say, any number of times, and things that one could argue led to operations, but directly, no.
But presumably lives have been ruined. If you win their affections, if you find your way into
well, they wouldn't be ruined. That would only happen in one of two ways, I think. Either we would consciously seek to ruin someone's life, which to me implies blackmail in a negative way, and the agency doesn't do that, really. One, you won't believe it, but it is a fact, we don't. Or there were an error, what we would call a flap, a screw-up, a mistake on our part at some level that caused harm to this individual. That's a big, big deal, and that does happen. It happily never happened to anyone I worked with. That's a career ender because a case officer's first obligation, the first obligation is to the safety and well-being of his assets, the people he works with. And we take that people's lives are at stake. And
they're the people you've recruited.
Yes, they're the people we have recruited or are working with in one way or another. And the institution as a whole and each officer individually takes the responsibility of people's lives very, very seriously. We don't play with people's lives. And errors happen and tragedy happens, but that's a major, major event. So we don't do that except by error to anybody.
Just in terms of recruiting operatives in other countries, you're obviously recruiting them to commit treason against their own country. Mm-hmm. What is the inducement? Is it simply money? How do you...
Oh, well, that's one of the fascinating things, actually. People are very complicated and multifaceted. Each person is a little different. So there are a large number of motivations that will induce someone to commit treason. And each officer will have his own strengths and weaknesses. My strength, because it fit my personality and where I was comfortable acting, and so therefore I acted most effectively because it fit me, was on what you could characterize as the ideological approach. I could say to you, there is injustice in your country, or to you, or to some ideal, that fits with your aspirations and your principles. And on rare occasions, does anyone have a chance to make a difference and to right a wrong? Most of us spend our lives doing our best, but having no effect. And that's no one's fault. We're all infinitesimally small pieces in a vast universe. But you have a chance to make a difference.
With a bag of gold?
No, maybe, but maybe. More often by appealing to someone's principles. There are purely venal people. I've worked with spies, with assets who were, to me, shockingly whorish. Shockingly. They did not care about anything except for this. But that's very unusual, very, very unusual. It's usually a much more subtle, complicated, and admirable series of impulses or drives.
Can you give us a sense of, I mean, you get recruited to the CIA, you make that phone call, you start working for them. What kind of training do you have to go through? And give us the sort of psychological dimensions of that and the physical dimensions of that.
Yeah, well, my training, as I say, lasted up to 2 years, and there are all different segments to it. There's a paramilitary phase, which is a vestige from World War II, the origins of the CIA when we were the OSS and parachuting and stuff, and then to the Vietnam War and the Korean War some. But it also continues because it is a bonding exercise is a real one. Creating an esprit de corps is a very important thing. Anyone who's played a sport, and probably all of you in companies have done these retreats, which I find a bit hackneyed. But if you play a sport, the esprit de corps is very important and meaningful. So the paramilitary training serves that function. Months of this stuff. It was never relevant to my career until the operation that I write about in the book, when it actually became relevant once. I didn't do military stuff in my career. So there's that component. There's the tradecraft component when, for a long, long time, we are trained in how to detect surveillance. That's pretty important. How to avoid surveillance. How to do things like a dead drop, and that's when you are following me, and I know that the other country's intelligence service is paying attention to me, but I have to communicate in some secure way with you. And how do I do it without being observed while I'm being observed all the time? Well, there are ways to do it, and we practice that sort of thing. A dead drop is when I'll be walking to the dry cleaner, and I actually will drop something on the ground that the people watching me won't notice, that you later will come by and pick up, and it will say, meet me at the Biltmore at 3, or whatever it says.
Did you ever have to endure simulated torture conditions?
Oh, I did, yes, part of our training. Yeah, very useful. Part of our training was to be captured and kidnapped, it depended. And then I was interrogated and tortured for about 4 days. And that's a very useful part of the training because CIA officers, American diplomats, American officials are at risk of being kidnapped and then tortured. In fact, the first assignment I had, literally, was I went from the street from graduate school, took the oath, and then I found myself immediately, for various reasons, on the Lebanon desk at a time, this is in the early mid-'80s, when a man named Bill Buckley, who was the senior CIA officer in Lebanon, had been just been kidnapped by Hezbollah. And our task, our goal, of course, was to find our man and try to save him. Every 2 or 3 months, Hezbollah would send by back channels to the CIA, which meant to me, as the junior officer on the Lebanon desk, a video of them torturing him. And they would do this just to show that they could establish alpha male dominance, over the CIA. And then eventually they sent what amounted to a snuff film showing them killing him by torture. So our training, being interrogated, is directly relevant to what might happen to us. And what do you do when you are completely helpless and you are being physically and mentally horribly abused. How do you remain sane? How do you not say something that will get someone killed? How do you maintain some vestige of yourself? And there are steps that one can take, which I can't talk about, that help. So that training was very relevant, and I did have that for days, yes.
Can you talk about what they actually did to you under these simulated conditions?
I can, because it's what we did in the subject of my book to the prisoners we had in this bizarre, frankly, sick transmogrification, where the methods that we were being trained in as torture, learning how to cope, two hacks asserted 20 years later to the front office of the CIA, well, look, here's how you extract information. That wasn't the case at all. But it was this 180-degree shift, and the methods became the methods of interrogation. And they were, there are two broad approaches to interrogation according to this doctrine. The objective is to, and this is the term of art ostensibly used, to psychologically dislocate the detainee, which really in layman's terms means to make half crazy. And how do you psychologically dislocate someone, and why? Well, the why is, according to the theory, it makes a person more malleable and manipulatable, so that you can extract information more easily, and supposedly it makes the person more willing to share information that you need. So how do you do that? There are two broad rubrics. There are the physical measures and psychological. And it's a fuzzy artificial distinction, but basically that's how you break it down. The physical measures, as defined by the agency, because we aren't, bad as things were, we are not the Syrians or the North Koreans. So you could throw someone against the wall or punch him in the stomach or slap him in the face to humiliate, put him in stress positions, leaning your forehead against the wall. That sounds easy, but it's not. Things like that. Chaining to a wall.
And this was done to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And during this period of 4 days,
yeah.
Were you prepared to capitulate even though you knew?
Well, this is one of the things I touch upon in the book. Well, I'll answer that in a second, but let me get to the psychological things too first. The psychological ones are much worse, and they are to disorient the person. And how do all of us perceive the world? Obviously from our five senses. How do we have a sense of self? Well, it's unconscious. We simply see the world as ourselves. But if you think for a moment, you realize that your sense of self comes from how you orient yourself and perceive it based on your five senses. You're over here. I feel the chair between us. This is all part of how we orient ourselves and feel who we are. And we know that the sun comes up and crosses the sky, and then it gets dark, we need to sleep, we need to eat, all this sort of stuff. But under our hands, none of that is necessarily true. And if you play with people's diurnal rhythms, you deprive them of sleep, you alter their eating patterns, you mess with their sense of time, you play with the sounds they hear or the sights they see, the smells they smell, all of this, you can make someone half crazy very fast. So the theory is that that will break someone down. So to answer your question, as I became involved in the interrogation, the experts said, this is how you do it. And I thought, well, they're experts, I don't know, they must know what they're talking about. But literally, as I was on the plane flying to start this whole process, I started to think, and I thought, this is exactly what I thought. I thought, well, wait a minute. I had this done to me. I know what happened to me. I became half crazy really fast. I was really miserable, and I was really pissed off. I was angry. But none of that made me more willing to share information or less able to withhold it. So I thought, well, that's just stupid. And it is.